Good morning and welcome to Farm Science Review Day 1 here on a sunny day in Central Ohio. Today is our first attempt at an interview here with the Golden Harvest interview series at Farm Science Review. Joining me today is Dr. Laura Lindsey. She is the soybean and small grain specialist with the Ohio State University. And she's been just a huge advocate for me in my career. I owe her a ton. So with that, I'll have Laura introduce herself.
Sure. My name is Laura Lindsey, and I'm the soybean and small grain agronomist at Ohio State. I've been around for about 12 years, and Wayde was one of my graduate students a few years ago. Probably more than a few, probably like 5, but
Yep.
A few years ago.
Perfect, Laura. So with commodity prices kind of the way that they are, a lot of farmers are going to be looking for ways to get more efficient with their farming operations this upcoming year. So I wanted to take just a little bit of time and talk about maybe the top 3 to 5 things that really every soybean farmer across the state should be doing, and wanted to pick your brain about that. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could elaborate on some of the 3 to 5 things that you think every soybean farmer should be doing.
Sure. Since harvest is coming up soon, thinking about next year, variety selection is really important. I know a lot of companies have a lot of information about variety selection. And Ohio State also has a variety trial, the Ohio Soybean Performance Test. That'll usually come out, it comes out as we harvest, so October going into November if harvest is later. So variety selection is, I think, one really important thing that doesn't necessarily cost more money to pick a good variety. So that's one. Another thing that doesn't cost more money but can really boost your yields is planting date. So it depends on what area you're in. But we're seeing earlier planting really help maximize soybean yield. Last year, not too far from here in Clark County, we planted mid-April and we yielded 91 bushels per acre. And as we go later into mid-May, late May, June, yields decline quite a bit. So if soil conditions, the moisture is adequate, I'm recommending planting at your early crop insurance date, which is about mid-April in most of the state. Other things, you can apply a lot to your soybeans, but if you are applying something, whether it's an insecticide, fertilizer, fungicide, whatever that is, make sure you have a reason to do it. So follow extension newsletters, follow your company agronomist, know what's going on in your field. If you have frog eye leaf spot and you're at the R3 stage, by all means, apply a foliar fungicide. So knowing what you have going on in your field and manage your inputs wisely is really important. And knowing what may be out there certain times of the year by following extension newsletters or industry agronomist information as well.
So I know that early planting is something that we often talk about as well. I get lots of follow-up questions, so we'll spend a little bit of time going through rapid-fire follow-up questions on early planting.
Yep.
First question that I get asked very often is, if I'm planting early, what kind of seeding rate should I do? Should I increase my seeding rate because I'm more likely to lose plant stand, or should I decrease my seeding rate because I get more time in that vegetative stage?
So we've done some seeding rate research along with planting date as well. And with our early planting dates, this year was March 25th. Sometimes it's first week of April, sometimes it's mid-April, depending on the year. But we're seeing, as long as I don't have my lowest rate's 100,000 seeds per acre. That's too low. But as long as I'm about 140 or more, it seems to be fine from a yield standpoint. We do see fewer plants come up though. So if we plant early, a lot of times I'll see 80, 90, 100,000 plants per acre. But when you plant early, the soybean will just bush out and there's really no negative yield implications of having 70, 80, 90,000 plants per acre.
Yeah. So when I'm trying to schedule harvest and I'm looking at, okay, what field am I going to go plant early first? What are some of those field characteristics that I should be looking for? Should I be looking at no-till fields first? Should I be looking for conventional tilled fields first? Give us some guidance on that.
Sure. So from a tillage standpoint, when we plant early, there is a risk of frost. And that risk is going to be greater to the soybean plants in a no-till situation. And we saw that this year out in Clark County. We had 2 fields, both planted on March 25th. The no-till field experienced a freeze, and my plant stand went down to about 20,000 plants per acre. same farm, same planting date. The only difference was our other field was conventionally tilled, and my plants were damaged by the frost, but they were more in that 60, 70, 80,000 plant per acre range. So till versus no-till makes a difference. Also with early planting, I think a well-drained field would be good, because we do see a lot of early season rain and ponding in the state.
If we're early planting, you mentioned frost. Frost is a concern with that.
Yes.
How much of a concern should we really, prioritize in our plan with that? It seems like soybeans are a little bit more frost resistant than we probably have given them credit for in the past. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've done planting date research, 3 years, 3 locations in Ohio. That one no-till situation this year was bad. That would be a replant situation for sure. Up in Northeast Ohio, I've had frost that has been pretty detrimental up in Worcester, Ohio. So there is a risk, but soybeans are more resilient than what you may think. The cotyledons have a lot of water in them, so it takes a lot to freeze them, but it can happen, and I've seen it happen. With soybeans, though, sometimes they emerge unevenly, which I think could be their benefit when it comes to frost. This year in Clark County, I still had plants come up even though there was freeze damage. The early emergers died, but the later ones then were able to push through.
Laura, last year you guys spent a lot of time with the Battle of the Belt project. You're really evaluating planting date across both soybeans and corn. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could summarize the results of the Battle of the Belt project a bit for us.
Sure. So Battle for the Belt is a project looking at corn versus soybean. So Battle for the Belt is corn belt versus soybean belt. And I do have a wrestling belt I'll bring it tomorrow. But it's really to see what crop you should prioritize planting first in the spring, corn or soybean. And for the most part, both plants like the best days. But if you have a bad day, soybeans are going to weather bad days in the spring much better than corn. In Clark County last year, the best corn yield was June 8th. That's not supposed to happen, but last year it was really cold, really wet, that corn suffered, and then we pivoted into a really dry phase. There was really poor root growth on the corn, and then it blew over. But soybeans, same planting date, same weather conditions. Soybeans yielded 91 bushels. So if you're going to plant maybe where it's a little bit iffy weather conditions, soybeans are going to do better than corn. But if you have really, really good growing conditions, I would prioritize corn, only because if you delay corn planting, your yield decline is going to be really sharp, where soybeans, the yield decline is a little bit slower as you delay planting.
So let's say, for example, we don't get our soybeans planted early. Are there any management strategies that we can do as we progress later into the planting season for some of those later planted fields?
Yeah, certainly. We planted soybeans into June, late June, July, in double crop situations. Sometimes my June soybeans actually do really well, and a lot of that's depending on when the rainfall is timed, maybe in August or so. But as you plant later into June and July especially, increasing your seeding rate is really important. So for double crop soybeans, increasing to 200,000, maybe even 250,000 seeds per acre is important. So as you delay planting, you need to have a higher seeding rate.
That's perfect. So transitioning back over, you mentioned fungicides. Mm-hmm. What types of products, we have strobilurins, we have triazoles. What type of products should we be looking for, especially as we're trying to maximize ROI here next year?
So when I think of an R3 application in Ohio, generally I'm thinking about frog-eye leaf spot. That's the one that we see the most in our fields. Not this year because it was really dry, but frog-eye leaf spot is one that we see. And we've evaluated several types of products. And I think having more than one mode of action is important. There are frog-eye leaf spot that is resistant to different fungicides. So having more than one mode of action would be the important thing to look at.
That's perfect. So we've also seen really the rise of some of these other root diseases and stem diseases across other areas of the Midwest. Are there any updates that you can provide us about maybe red crown rot or any of those other diseases that are starting to pop up a bit more?
I haven't heard too much about red crown rot this year. The one thing that was maybe a little bit different was that soybean vein necrosis virus. I was in Morrow County for a field day, and there was a leaf sample, and it was the soybean vein necrosis virus. Those are tricky ones to manage because it's a virus transmitted by an insect. So that's where it goes back to using your products wisely. If you see a disease like that, spraying a foliar fungicide is not going to help you because it's not going to control a virus. Another one that is of concern that I see is sudden death syndrome. Sudden death syndrome is another one that's tricky because it infects the root early in the season, but the visual symptoms are just so striking later in the year. So I get a lot of questions about people wanting to spray foliar products for sudden death syndrome. And it looks ugly, but it's not going to help you. So going back and looking at your seed treatment for maybe next year could be a good management tactic. So yeah, knowing what you have and what controls it is really important.
So with sudden death syndrome, are there any environmental conditions or management practices that we could change to help reduce the amount of sudden death syndrome that we can see on a given year? I know that's something that can occasionally be tied to early planting, like we had just spoken about.
Yeah, so sudden death syndrome can be a concern when you plant early, and I haven't done that research, but in Wisconsin, my colleague Sean Conley has, and you can have more sudden death syndrome when you plant early, but the yield benefit of planting early still outweighs maybe that disease potential. Compaction is another issue that could influence sudden death syndrome, and also soybean cyst nematode, according to our plant pathologist. So there are other factors that can influence sudden death syndrome.
So maybe it might be fair to say that if we are planting early and sudden death syndrome is a concern, we should probably consult with our local GHX specialist or seed advisor to choose the correct variety that's most strong against sudden death syndrome. As we wrap up here, I did want to ask a couple final things. What other projects are you currently working on? I know you're a pretty busy lady over there at Ohio State, and you always have lots of projects going on.
Yeah, I love research. Planting date is just one I really, really enjoy, so we do a lot with planting date. This year, we also have a harvest date project. We want to look at how delaying harvest how that affects soybean quality, both amino acids, protein, oil, things like that, but also sprouting, shatter, those harvest losses you may see in your field. We just wrapped up a large biological seed treatment project, so we have 100 locations across the U.S., so that's a really cool one, and you'll see information coming out about that over the winter. But yeah, a wide variety of projects, insecticides, fungicides, all kinds of things.
You know, you mentioned the harvest priority that you're looking at, and I think that triggers another question about what we've been experiencing weather-wise here in Ohio for really the past month or more. And that's dry conditions. And so there's a lot of folks that are currently out there harvesting soybeans. 8%, I saw one yield monitor at 7.9% yesterday. Yeah. Would you mind expanding a little bit about potential harvest issues with soybeans as we encounter all this dry weather?
Yeah, so moisture, if you have a lower moisture, 7, 8, 9%, the chances of loss is greater. We did some on-farm research a few years ago, and a farmer, I think, was harvesting around about 8% moisture, and we were getting about a 5 bushel per acre loss. So my job was to crawl around in the field and count the beans that were on the ground. So there are a lot of harvest losses associated with harvesting at a drier moisture. This year, I don't think people could avoid it necessarily. Mother Nature really dealt us a card. The biggest concern this year actually is getting rainfall now. So if the beans are dry in harvest, you can't get to the field in time and you get rain, that really weakens the pod structure and you could get quite a bit more shattering loss. So if a field is ready and it's ready to be harvested, harvest it, because that wet dry cycle, if that happens, can be really detrimental.
Well, thanks so much, Laura. Appreciate everybody tuning in to our first interview in the interview series with Golden Harvest here at Farm Science Review. Our next one will be this afternoon at 1 o'clock. We'll see you then.